Was that a bell that I heard ring? That's got to be too soon, right?
I think so. I think 55 is
55. Yeah. Hello, 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 hello. Thanks. Still good for after school today? Okay.
I'm not able to bring my brain today.
No, that's okay.
I want to.
Hello, hello. This is not power stance. Hello. Hello. How's it going? It's perfectly acceptable. Happy Friday. Hello? Happy Friday. What's 3 days? Remind me. Hello, hello? Like old times. You know.
second one in DC. How long were they stuck?
What is up with the air conditioner?
All right, hi everybody. Happy Friday to you all. Hope that you're off to a nice weekend, thunder, you know, all that kind of stuff. Hooray. 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 So, today we're going to finish up with Mexico stuff and move on to some Brazil things. Maybe we'll get to reggaeton today, maybe we won't. I don't know. We'll see. Tell me everything you know about Mexico, as have learned in this class.
Mexico City.
Mexico City? Spanish?
There's currently a diaspora going on due to cartels.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there is.
The entire situation is the cartels are making the drugs and then are shipping them illegally across to the U.S. because there's a buy in the U.S. for all these drugs, and it becomes a cycle problem.
Do you know, and yes, everything you said is accurate. Do you know how most of the drugs actually get here? Not the way you think.
The cartel.
Okay, a lot of them is planes, a lot of them is submarines, and a lot of them is boats. It's people kind of conflate these, and sometimes the news doesn't help separate these. The drugs are not coming across the border with people. I mean, that's again, this is a little bit of a generalization. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I'm just saying that by and large, you can't get people to carry enough drugs. Okay, you need much larger things. So yes, mostly it's illegal airplane flights, not like, you know, putting it into your, it's not putting it into your checked luggage, not like that. I'm saying like actually illegal plane flights, like an unregistered plane taking off from one place and landing in another. Boats, super, super, super common to just basically get a bunch of speedboats loaded up with stuff and try to get it into, oh boy, please, that would be bad. And then the really hilarious stuff is submarines, like literally home-built submarines that are being used for drug smuggling. Oh, I see them all the time. Yeah, they're crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Like, and I'm not condoning any of this or anything, but I do have to like mildly respect somebody who's got enough homebrew engineering, like guts, yeah, to like make a submarine and be like, all right, I'm gonna use this and I'm gonna be underwater in this thing to get somewhere. That's wild.
Please call the front office. Thank you.
Together by E6000
Yeah.
prayer.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, so yes, everything you said is accurate. What else? What else about Mexico?
They gained independence from Spain in 1821.
Yeah, 1821. Very good. Very true.
31 states.
30. Was it 31 or 32? I thought it was.
It was 31.
Okay.
Karen, you're insane.
What else? What else? Yeah, they earned independence. Yeah, so fought against the Spanish. What about how long have people been in Mexico? Very, very long time. Okay. Yeah.
Mayan, Aztec.
Yeah. Olmecs.
And then the Spain came over and absolutely just wrecked a lot of them, but not all of them.
But not everybody, right?
And almost everybody in Mexico is native.
Is descended from indigenous people from Mexico, right? There is a little bit of mixing with African and Spanish ancestry as well, but pretty strongly indigenous to that area, which is different. That is unique. United States and Mexico fought a war. Why was that war fought? Not purely Texas, but land, mostly land. Okay, it was mostly a territorial expansion war that the United States fought against Mexico, pretty much to just get a bunch of land. What was the result of that war, by the way? Yeah, we got basically the Southwest. So pretty much all that area from not Louisiana, but everything west of Louisiana and about everything south of Colorado, that's pretty much what we got from that war. So a whole bunch.
Mexico used to be like, what was it?
Yeah, Mexico was huge. It was a huge country. It was gigantic. I mean, it's still a big country.
They lost like 50% of the land to us. in the war.
50% of their land, yes, of their territory, right. Okay, cool. Tell me stuff about music. We've learned about one type of music. We'll learn about the other one today.
About two types.
Well, we haven't listened to banda yet, so.
Mariachi and banda.
Yeah, mariachi and banda. Tell me some stuff about mariachi. Somebody hasn't talked much today. Tell me something about mariachi. Yeah. Yeah, it's more orchestral. I described it as more of an art music than a pop music or a folk music. What kind of instruments do you expect to see in a mariachi group? Trumpets. What else? Violins. Guitarone, yeah. Viola, the little guy, the 5-string little guitar. Harp sometimes, and you do get regular guitar sometimes too. Yeah, good. And then singers. Yeah, you always, not always, but very often have singing involved in mariachi stuff. They're basically never drums. Yeah, basically never drums. Very, very, very rarely have I heard like drumming in mariachi stuff. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but like traditionally that's not a thing. Yeah. It is composed. Yeah, it is like somebody sits down to write pieces for a mariachi group, right? So that is quite different than what like a lot of folk music where it is like passed down. Mariachi stuff is written, like it is a composed thing, which I think it makes it different. Like it has like structure to it in a way that a lot of other kind of folk music stuff doesn't, which I think is cool. I'm guessing from just your reactions and stuff, you enjoyed the mariachi stuff last class, yeah? It's pretty cool. I think it's a lot of fun. Then banda, we haven't listened to that yet, but I think you're going to like it too. What is its main influence? German polka, right. So banda is way more based in polka music than It's a mix of other traditional things too, but it is mostly polka, which is kind of interesting.
It's polka and song, right?
Yes, and some other things, but yeah, basically it's those two things smashed together. Yeah, cool. So we're going to talk about Brazil today. What do you know about Brazil?
You know?
I'm sorry, what?
I don't understand.
Mass stabbing.
Oh, okay, sure, okay,
There's a Rainbow Six Siege map in Brazil.
okay,
It's the worst.
good to know.
The worst map.
Okay. Yeah,
I actually hate that map, bro. That map
Brava
is
is from
so
Brazil.
ugly.
yeah. It was a colony of Portugal as opposed to Spain, unlike most of South America. So it speaks. People in Brazil speak Portuguese. It is. That's accurate.
Neymar's
Sure.
Brazil. Go Neymar.
Uh-huh.
The big like statue.
Cable cars. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Cristo Redentor is the name of that statue. Do you know what city that's in? Rio de Janeiro. Not Sao Paulo. It's Rio. Sao Paulo is another big city, though. Do you know what the capital of Brazil is? Nope.
I'm stupid. It was worth a try.
You're very close, actually.
Brazil City.
Brasilia. Brasilia is the capital of Brazil. But
And had walls along the main major roads to block out views of the
yep,
parts of the city.
yep. So Brazil is a really fascinating place. Musically and culturally, Brazil has a huge influence on the rest of the world. And we'll get into that today, which will hopefully be interesting for you. Okay, I did want to at least have a polka piece played for you so you have a little bit of context. And I was going through and finding some, authentic polka. And I said, wait a second, why would I do that? Weird Al exists. So Weird Al, who is a fantastic musician, also happens to be an excellent accordion player and does very much like playing polka. So
Wait, why does it say North Korea polka and then there's America?
here we go. That's pretty accurate. Anyway, yeah, Weird Al. It doesn't have to make sense. It's Weird Al. Okay.
Why is it a German form of music being played from
Well, because
perspective and towards North Korea?
well, look, it's because it's Weird Al. It doesn't have to make sense. It's goofy. It's just go with it.
Does polka usually have trumpets specifically, or just?
Yep. So usually trumpets, sometimes other brass instruments too, trombones and baritones and stuff like that.
You mentioned some sort of orange.
Yeah, sometimes they use different kind of weird horn things that I could explain, but nobody cares. But trumpets, tubas, that kind of stuff is very common. Clarinets are very, very common. They had a banjo player in there. It's kind of weird. You don't usually see banjo in a polka band, but whatever. But yeah, it's America, sure. Accordion, however, is a big part of the whole thing. Okay, so I mentioned that banda was more of a dance music, because remember, mariachi isn't really dance music. Like, obviously you can dance to it, but it's not intended to be dance music. Banda is meant to be dance music, and it has kind of a traditional dance form that goes along with it. I just want to do this one first. Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. Yeah, right. Yeah, all my ads are going to be interesting. So, banda is based off of a bunch of kind of older Mexican folk dance forms, like at least the dance part of it. So there's kind of a traditional dance style that goes along with this. It's a little bit of an example of that. It's basically kind of a variation of like a two-step dance. A lot of the same kind of dance style that a lot of polka is based off of. So it's sort of a folk dancey kind of thing. The outfits that people are wearing are a lot more just sort of like, for show. It's less of a traditional thing. Anytime if you see a band that's playing and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is a banda thing or if this is mariachi. If people are in uniform, it's basically always going to be mariachi if they're playing. Because banda bands don't often wear uniforms. All right, let's get a sense of what the actual music itself sounds like here. So this is a banda group from Tijuana. So it's a lot different, and I know it can be kind of tricky to separate this and kind of mariachi, but the instrumentation that you see in a banda group is way more like a polka band than it is anything else. No string instruments, very rarely string instruments, I should say. Sometimes you might see guitar being played, but the bass is always going to be a tuba, or a sousaphone in this case. Clarinets and trumpets, absolutely. You're going to have drums in a banda group, so either drum set or various kind of different Latin drums, but you're going to have more percussion stuff as a part of it. And the music is usually faster because it's meant to be dance music. Okay? Yeah.
Maybe kind of have a combined question.
I'm prepared.
Trombone.
What's up with the trombone valves?
Valve trombone. Yeah, it's just a thing. Yeah. They are disgusting, but different. And that's not just a thing that's in Mexico. Valve trombones are kind of a European thing too. They're basically baritones. Like it's like a big trumpet but with a slide. Yeah. So it's an octave down from a trumpet. So you still use a trombone mouthpiece, but the valves are exactly the same as what it is on a trumpet. So if you're gonna play trumpet, you can pick up a valve trombone and just go ham on it.
So it's a big boy trumpet.
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. It's just an octave lower. Yeah,
That's
so
super
it's
weird.
double sized, but yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's so. Is that always a thing where you're always gonna have valve trombones? No, it's just this band uses them. That's all. So way more of a pop music kind of thing. It's meant to be just like dance party music. This is why, if you go to a Mexican restaurant, usually the stuff that you hear being played there is this. It's banda stuff, because it's meant to be, big, upbeat, happy kind of dance music kind of thing.
I don't know, bro. Some of them I'd be going to, they'd be like having like, I don't know, some like solo, like crazy, like heart-wrenching stuff,
Oh, yeah, there is a ballad tradition too, and that's a different kind of thing. So I actually, the previous years I talked about this, we talked about Mexican ballad stuff, but it's such a huge thing, and it is popular, but it's not as popular as this kind of stuff. You hear this a lot more. Yeah.
So what was the sort of like high-pitched kind of sound?
Clarinet.
So just clarinet and...
Yeah, just playing an extreme altissimo range. Yeah. In order to hear it, sometimes you just gotta overblow the thing. Yeah. It's a sound. It's a sound. Yeah, so like that crazy high sound, it's clarinet, huh? It does. Yeah. I mean, it has it's mixed well. And like the sound is very kind of idiomatic. Let's listen to some more stuff. It's a different
We had
band.
such a great experience with Empire. We would recommend it to anyone. Customer service
No.
and the personal touch.
Véngase para acá, plebes. Véngase para acá, viejo. Arránquese con el corrido 24, compa Roberto Fierro. Me dicen el 24, entre la gente importante, mis amigos y parientes, también me llaman de Yo soy nacido en la sierra, en el pueblo de la S, y en el negocio en donde ando, se anda rifando la muerte. Que vengan los norteños a cantarme mis corridos, traigan perico y cervezas, también botellas de vino. Y aquí no nos acabamos una vuelta, pero no. Siempre he sido responsable, por eso tengo un lugar. Y cuando se me ha ofrecido, me he sabido jugar. Tengo privada animando, pero también tengo jefe, a quien yo respeto mucho, porque es un hombre valiente. Los números andan fuerte, por todos es bien sabido. Las cosas salen bien, porque somos muy unidos. Hasta el rosario se va con
I'm laughing just because the vibrato is so crazy. Like the super wide vibrato on the clarinet and trumpets is like, it's ridiculous.
It's like a constant growl.
Yeah, it almost is. Like it's so wide that it sounds like a growl. And it's so like idiomatic and so like unique, but so like instantly identifiable. It's like, oh, that's banda. I get it now.
Is the tuba player like playing a certain way to make it sound weird, or is
It's a great question.
Is it like making the mic or something?
Yes, it's all of those things. So tuba play, if you've never actually heard like a tuba player, like especially a Sousa player who can like play real nasty, like it's a really unique sound and like is really kind of a cool sound. A lot of times where I hear a banda group play live, I've heard a couple of bands like this play before. Usually the tuba player has a bass drum mic spring mounted onto the center of their bell, so like a kick drum mic, usually running to like a big old giant Marshall like 4x10 bass amp stack. So it's almost like this insane, overdriven, distorted bass guitar sound, but it's coming from a tuba, so like it has a different kind of attack to it. It's really unique and really cool and really wild.
So I saw him get like a step closer to the mic.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the clipping is a part of the experience. The distortion is what you're after here. Yeah, so it is very unique sounding. It's kind of a lot more like if you ever hear like a real Southern marching band with a big old giant tuba line play, like that splatty distortion sound is the thing. And when you hear it being played extremely loudly at you is very, very like exciting. It's like you're being physically attacked and it's very cool. Yes?
Like the cowboy get-ups?
Yeah.
Did we get that from them?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the kind of big hat, like cowboy look. I mean, you know, sure, cowboys are an American thing too, but not exclusively an American thing. A ranchero in Mexico is a cowboy. And the look of what you think of as like country is way more influenced by Mexico than it is by America. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? Its music is its own thing, yes.
But the like style of country is from
Absolutely. Not exclusively, but very, very influenced, yeah.
Almost like they were in that part of the country.
Huh, weird. Funny thing you say that. Huh. It's almost like exactly like that thing you said. Anyway, so banda, super cool. Like I said, if you go to a Mexican restaurant, this is pretty much what you're always going to hear. If you do, however, get a chance to hear like a live banda group or a live mariachi group, you should freaking take it. It's cool music. It's interesting to listen to. Usually you hear a banda group is much more of like a dance party kind of club setting than it would be for a mariachi kind of thing. But in either case, if you get a chance to hear something like that live, obviously go, listen, experience, have some fun. Cool. So that's kind of where we're at with Mexico. I want to move into talking a bit about Brazil. No? Oh, I have, yeah, at some point in my life. Okay, so Brazil. Big old giant country is Brazil. And like we mentioned before class, or before we start taking notes here, Brazil was a Portuguese colony, which is kind of unique. They didn't have a lot of other colonies in the Americas. They had lots of other colonies in lots of other places, but in the Americas at least, Portugal really only got a hold of Brazil. You do know where Portugal is at on the map, right? It's directly connected to Spain. It's on the Iberian Peninsula. I'll show you just to make sure. Portugal. So Portugal is, hello. There we go. Portugal's right there. Okay. So it is basically connected to Spain. But Portugal and Spain have very different cultures, and they don't always get along very well. Like I mentioned, Spain was a kind of Islamic state for a while. That is not true of Portugal. They have different sort of heritages and obviously different languages and all that kind of stuff too. They all went colony crazy though. Portugal especially was pretty crazy about trying to colonize places. And they were all of these colonizing places were into making money. They were colonizing basically to, make a lot of money. Portugal was like really, really into it for the money. And that kind of informs a lot of stuff about Brazil. Because Brazil, which notice, here's Portugal, little tiny Portugal. Brazil, way over here on the other side of the planet, almost there, is gigantic, right? So I haven't changed the scale here. I'll zoom out so we can actually get all of Brazil. Brazil is huge and is much larger than Portugal itself. There's Brazil. And Brazil also has, as a part of it, unbelievable agricultural potential. The largest rainforest on the planet, the Amazon, is almost entirely in Brazil. The Amazon River itself is one of the largest rivers in the world and is almost entirely in Brazil. Actually, I think it is entirely in Brazil. You can grow basically anything on the planet in Brazil. And it grows like crazy in Brazil because they have a very wet climate. They have a very humid climate. It's basically tropical there. The ground is crazy fertile. You can just grow stuff very, very easily. And Portugal was especially interested in growing things, especially, not, they grew a lot of tobacco, but the thing in Brazil, there was a lot of indigo, actually. That's a good catch, but it was sugarcane. Sugarcane was the thing, the thing. Sugarcane was by far the most common export. I say export. It's the thing that was grown in Brazil and taken out of Brazil by the Portuguese by far the most. Yes.
So was sugarcane or tobacco more popular?
Okay. Well, it depends on the place you're talking about because they were both grown pretty hugely in the Caribbean and Central and South America. We're talking about Brazil, it's really sugarcane. That was the cash crop. Bananas also grew quite well there, but bananas weren't as much a thing as, especially in the 16s and 1700s, as they are now. Mostly, as I mentioned before, because they weren't the same. They weren't really a domesticated thing yet. And that ended up being more of a Central American thing, but obviously it's grown all over the place in that region too. So early on, it wasn't really bananas. Now, there were other kind of citrus things that were a big part of this too, so there was plenty of other kind of foodstuffs that are involved, but it's really, really, really sugarcane, okay? Brazil was the largest producer of sugar for a long time. And as I mentioned, making sugarcane is a pretty tough thing to do. It's extremely dangerous because, sugarcane is basically like bamboo. It's like a grass. It grows super tall. But in order to cut it down, you need yourself a machete or something sharp to cut it down. And then trying to split it open is really kind of dangerous. It's really easy to get your hand hacked off or to, pretty horribly wound yourself. The most common destination for slaves who are coming to Central, North, or South America by far was Brazil. If you were a slave, you had a higher chance of ending up in Brazil than you did literally anywhere else in these other places. They have a huge amount of coastline, they have a huge amount of ports, and Portugal wanted that sugar for that money.
How are relations between Portugal and Spain?
Poor, mostly.
Because Portugal is closer to the that has the coast.
It does have more coastline, yes.
Wouldn't they
So this gets into a whole thing.
be able to stop Spain from colonizing as much as they did because a lot of things were more Spanish than Portuguese?
So this gets in. We could talk about this for a long time. Spain had navy power. Spain had a gigantic navy. Several times they had gigantic navies. They kept losing them for other hilarious reasons too, which I'm not going to get into. If you know anything about Spanish Armada stuff, you can make lots of funny jokes at them at their expense. But Spain traditionally had a gigantic navy, which they used to kind of push people around. The thing is, though, that they might have had giant navies, but most of the smart navigation people were Portuguese. The people who made the maps were Portuguese. And so there's kind of this weird dance that's done back and forth throughout this colonization history where Spain ended up providing the boats, but the captains and the navigators and the map makers were Portuguese. So it gets really kind of wacky and complicated. It depends, and sometimes they would kind of co-found a place and then just fight a war later to decide who's actually going to take control of it. and that's where they ended up with most of the colonies. Yeah. So if you really want to dig into Spanish-Portuguese relation, I would encourage you to do that. It's actually quite interesting. There's a lot to it. Portuguese navigation schools are really fascinating as a thing. You get to learn about the hilarious failed Spanish armadas several times. There's a lot of good stuff to learn there if you actually want to. But it's way outside of the scope of this class. Okay, like way, way, way out. So suffice to say, Brazil, Portuguese, sugarcane, and in order to support the production of that sugarcane, Portugal just stole people, slavery, and a lot of the slave trade stuff that was happening in West Africa, a lot of it was supported by the Portuguese. And yeah, bad. So a lot of slaves who ended up in the New World ended up in Brazil. If you ended up in Brazil, you had a super short life and you were probably going to die pretty horribly. Because of that, there was a constant supply of people being brought to Brazil to support the production of sugarcane. Now, this also gets really complicated because there obviously were lots of indigenous people who lived in Brazil. I shouldn't say lots. There were and still are indigenous people who live in Brazil, but they are not really a part of the ethnicity in the same way that it was in Mexico. So the folks who are in Brazil now are ethnically much more African, with a little bit of Portuguese influence, but not very much. Brazil is a very more Africanized country than in some of the other places are. And most of that's because people in Brazil freaking hated the Portuguese. And why would you, want to, get involved with them? Why would you want to have kids with them? Why do you want to have anything to do with them? You basically hate them because they are actively ruining your and your family's lives because, slavery. Yeah. So that's much more on the West Coast, yes. So there are other civilizations, well, I shouldn't say civilizations. There were other people who lived there. They were not the huge civilizations that you had on the West or in the North, okay? And a lot's because it's the freaking Amazon rainforest, okay? I mean, it's deadly, deadly jungle. And it's not exactly like the place where like, hey, I got an idea, let's build a city here. Usually they do that if somebody's like actively forcing you to do it. The Portuguese, right? So a lot of the cities that do exist in the Amazon, and there are cities that do exist in the Amazon, are not there because they wanted to be there. They're forced to have been built there. Yes?
I've seen a couple of news studies that have said that there were a lot of people in there building cities, but they were all made out of wood, so they
became a part of the forest, right? And it's really hard to find information about that because is the rainforest. Nature will reclaim you aggressively and quickly. Yeah.
But we've found like a couple massive cities from even before the Columbus.
Sure. It's not to say that they don't exist. It's that we don't know a whole bunch about anything there. So anyway, okay. So Brazil's history is quite interesting. The amount of slave revolts and then eventual wars that were fought in Brazil is quite a bit here too. Let's get a real quick history of things. And this is quick.
Your business is here. With Wix, you get advanced AI.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mr.
Alô, alô, responde. Se gostas mesmo de mim de verdade.
Jeez, it's loud. My God.
This is South America, and here is Brazil. Now, vamos lá, shall we? Brazil is big. Very big. And several thousands of years ago, its bigness became home to a number of tribes, such as the Tupi, a warlike people who came to dominate the coast, cultivating crops of cassava and cannibalizing their captives, assuming they'd absorbed the strength of the unfortunate fellows they feasted on. This obviously didn't work as they were subdued by the Portuguese. You see, in the year 1500, the navigator Pedro Álvares Cabral discovered Brazil and claimed it for Portugal, but they neglected it for a while to focus on Asia, where more money was to be had. In the 1530s, Portugal's king directed stronger Portuguese colonial efforts in Brazil, and things started happening, such as sugarcane plantations, demand for the produce of which led to large-scale use of imported African slave labor. Then along came the Jesuits, led by Manuel Nóbrega, who built schools and churches and advocated the humane treatment of natives whom they converted to Christianity. Now, a certain Brazilian harbour had been overlooked by the Portuguese, and the French snapped it up, prompting Portuguese pushback, expelling the French and founding the city of Rio de Janeiro. Now, when Portugal was joined to Spain from 1580 to 1640, it naturally inherited Spain's enemies, including the Netherlands, who nibbled off a bit of Brazil for themselves, which was governed very wisely by this man, but not by his successors, and the Portuguese Brazilians reconquered the land, boosting Brazilian nationalism. Bandeirantes began burrowing deeper into the continent in search of slaves, gold, or grazing ground, and the journeys of those rough and rugged men, like this fellow, facilitated the expansion of Brazil's borders. Numerous economic, political, and societal alterations were inducted by Portugal's Prime Minister, the Marquis of Pombal, who embodied much of the European Enlightenment's philosophy and granted natives legal rights, while expelling the Jesuits, whose power and influence he resented. The Enlightenment also instilled ideas of revolution, driving one Tiradentes to plan a revolution for independence in 1789. But when one of his fellow conspirators was offered some tax relief, he betrayed the plot, and Tiradentes was hanged and cut into 4 pieces. After Napoleon invaded Portugal in 1807, the Prince Regent and his royal court fled to Brazil and thus set up a Portuguese government in exile. The prince was welcomed in Brazil, and he set about reforming the country, opening it up to trade with other countries and encouraging Brazilian manufacturing. But when the war in Europe ended, that continent began calling on the royal family to return. The royals didn't really want to, and simply made Brazil co-equal in status to Portugal, which angered the Portuguese at having their status made identical to a colony. Brazilians themselves were not happy, as they increasingly were demanding independence. John VI was essentially compelled by his bifurcated political stresses to return to the mother country, leaving his son Pedro behind as regent. But Portugal wanted Pedro too. Pedro refused, and on September the 7th, 1822, declared Brazil's independence, later being crowned emperor. After Portuguese forces were beaten and recognized Brazil's sovereignty, a number of other occasions of unrest arose, such as the war that saw the emancipation of Uruguay. Brazil prospered and thrived under the bright star that was Pedro II, himself a melancholy, complicated man, but also highly intelligent, 14 languages, and who patronized science and culture. He was just the sort of person to steer Brazil into greatness. Victorious in 3 wars in a row, Brazil's economy grew. Immigrants arrived from Italy, Spain, and Germany, and modernization appeared in railways, factories, steamships, telegraph communication, and the abolition of slavery. But, not seeing any promise in Pedro's potential heirs, the beloved popular emperor was quietly and unexpectedly overthrown in one of the most uneventful revolutions in history. He went into exile in Europe, where he died dreaming of Brazil. Shaky times followed as Brazil, the republic, was led by dictators, but things got better. Rio was beautified, and Sao Paulo, glutted on wealth from coffee plantations, expanded considerably. Then the Great Depression happened. Then in 1930, one Getúlio Vargas lost the presidential election, so he forced his way into power in a revolution, and this was wonderful. I mean, just look at this girl. Look how happy she is for the new totalitarian regime. But in all seriousness, Vargas strengthened Brazil's economy, helped the poor, and invigorated industrialization. Under President Juscelino Kubitschek, the sparkling modernist new capital Brasilia was inaugurated, with its many unusual buildings. This is a church, for instance, designed by the visionary architect Oscar Niemeyer. Political turbulence or a military dictatorship run Brazil from 1964 to 85, a time of mass censorship, repression, and violent crackdowns on suspected state enemies. But Brazil still managed to win the FIFA World Cup in 1970, led by the legendary Pelé. Problems like recession, inflation, debt, and so on were tackled by Cardoso, and remarkable growth was had under the popular Lula, who was nevertheless imprisoned for corruption. He was followed by Dilma Rousseff, who ended up impeached for fiscal misdeeds. 2019, meanwhile, saw the election of nationalist populist Jair Bolsonaro. Now, recent years have seen tens of millions of Brazilians lifted out of poverty, and we hope the crime-ridden shantytown favelas will one day be but a memory. Brazil is a country of many surprises, stereotypically the land of samba, carnaval, Copacabana Beach, football, and a 98-foot-tall statue of Christ the Redeemer overlooking Rio. It's also the land of the Amazon, the world's smallest frog, armadillos, the largest Japanese population outside of Japan, cities full of Germans still speaking their East Pomeranian dialect, and 21 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Brazil...
All right, that's enough of that. So, now the thing that you might mention, especially if you just see like the pictures of people, it's like, wait a second, it doesn't seem like, it seems like there's a lot more like European type people who are in power there. Yeah, in power. That doesn't mean that that's the actual like real population of the place, right? And that is kind of an important thing to sort of keep in mind here, is that there's still a lot of there's a lot of things happening ethnically in Brazil. There's still a pretty big disparity in wealth and equality and all that kind of stuff. And, we'll see how all that works itself out in the future. Brazil is a developing country and is becoming a pretty big part of the world economy. And more and more and more and more, you end up hearing and seeing a lot of Brazilian culture kind of creeping its way into other parts of the world. And one of the most common ways that you see that is through Brazilian music, because it's pretty powerful in terms of its influence. There's two styles of music we're going to learn about, and the first one is samba. Samba is wild, as you'll hear. Okay, so samba is unique for a lot of reasons, but samba is an almost entirely percussion-based music. Not a lot of wind instruments. And when you do have wind instruments, they're usually things like whistles, like street whistles, not like, somebody whistling. Because samba is mostly street party dance music. It's kind of impossible to talk about samba without talking about Carnival, which is the giant street party that exists in especially Rio de Janeiro. I can't show you videos from any of that stuff because basically none of them are school appropriate. And that does make finding videos of good samba performances really hard because it's easy to find great music. It's hard to find great music that you're allowed to watch in school so there aren't just constantly naked people everywhere. So, a thing. Now, because it's mostly party music, its samba groups are giant and they're meant to be parade units usually. So usually samba bands or groups are meant to be on the move because they're in parades. They're moving in the streets. They're playing crazy loud drum-based percussion dance music. And it's so freaking loud and also really, really cool. When I say groups, I mean samba schools, like schools where people are learning how to play samba stuff, will put together groups that routinely will have groups in the hundreds, like 400, 500, 600 people all playing together. It gets unbelievably loud. Well, what kind of instruments? There's a lot of different kinds of drums, and in some ways I'm already kind of throwing a lot of percussion names at you by trying to just hope that you remember the difference between a bongo and a conga, right? And that samba is a music and not an instrument. So I'm not going to throw a bunch more percussion instruments at you, but just know that there's a bunch of cool stuff. Okay, I'm going to hope that me in the past did make sure that these were school appropriate. Always feel like I'm rolling the dice. Here we go. All right. Go-go bells. That gives you a little bit of an idea here. This is like big street festival, like drum kind of stuff is what samba really is.
Lost in the sea of
Okay.
chaos, get back on solid ground with pole trekking
Oh, this is in
methods.
Belgium.
Undertake
Okay,
the
okay,
actuals.
okay. Okay, great, thanks. Oh, it's a small little group. That's all right. Okay, so I can't, it's kind of, I feel always bad about this because it's really hard to find like actual Brazilian samba groups to show in class just because none of them are school appropriate. But like, they're so much cooler and like just seeing and hearing a giant group like this is really, really awesome. Samba has become really popular in lots of other places in Central and South America. When I was in Costa Rica a couple of years ago, I saw a couple of different samba groups there. Costa Rica is really into samba stuff. It's a thing you can find samba groups in Mexico and Venezuela and Colombia, like kind of all over the place. It's just really popular because it's big, crazy, loud dance music. And it's hard like to not like that when you hear it. So it's kind of like, you know, it's the New Orleans vibe of like a marching band during you know, big parties and street festivals there, except without all the instruments and just way more drums. So much, much cooler kind of sound. So samba, very, very popular. Lots of people, there are samba groups that play from schools that you can be a part of. There's community samba bands in Brazil. It's kind of all over the place. Okay, now this one is quite different, which is interesting. This is called bossa nova, which is Portuguese for new trend or new wave. And bossa nova is still a really popular thing musically and culturally that has come out of Brazil. So bossa nova is from the 1950s, is when this kind of got started. It is a weird halfway point between American jazz, especially like cool jazz, like Miles Davis era cool jazz, and samba mixed together, which is quite a weird combination, but is cool sounding. It was mostly a guitar style at first, but then eventually became more of a percussion, like kind of looks like a jazz band kind of thing. But usually with a singer involved, usually still has like kind of a dance kind of feel to it. I have Muzak here because the thing, I'm sure I can just hear Trey saying it, that as soon as I play this the first time, you're like, oh, it's elevator music. This is really, really, really the one that you think of as elevator music. And it's because of this thing that we've talked about before, the company Muzak, who in the 1980s decided that the most calming and relaxing music that you could possibly ever listen to is this thing, is bossa nova. And when people were in potential places where they could be stressed out, the company Muzak started, suggesting you play bossa nova at people to help, chill them out. So if you're all stuck into a metal box flying through the air in a small building and somebody farts and you just want to die, the best kind of music to play, they thought, was bossa nova for elevators. So yes, nowadays you are going to think of the sound that we're going to hear here as being elevator music. It was not initially that at all, okay? This was like the hippest thing in the universe whenever bossa nova came out of Brazil in the 50s. This was like it. This was super hip stuff then. Nowadays, we just think of it as, unfortunately, this kind of elevator music. So let's hear some guitar playing.
for my business because of its massive scope for functionality and
Great. Yeah, that's nice. So that's very bossa nova-y kind of sounding. Now, it started as this kind of guitar thing, but it didn't stay that way. When we come back from lunch, I'll play some more bossa nova stuff for you to hear. So we'll call it quits there for the moment until we leave for lunch in a second.
Come over, come by me like a brother.